A story you'll definitely want to hear to the end. On the day my life fell apart, the sky was clear and almost shamelessly blue, the kind of blue you only see at the end of August, when summer, exhausted by its own generosity, offers its last warm days before the inevitable decline. I had always loved this time of year, its poignant, aching beauty, but now it will forever be linked to the horror that slithered like an icy serpent into my soul. My name is Lily. I am 32, and I am a wallflower. Not the coquette from a romance novel who hides a sly glance behind lowered lashes, but a true one to the marrow of my bones. The kind who blushes at any compliment, speaks in a quiet, faltering voice, and avoids the company of men like the plague. This shyness, this insecurity ingrained in my flesh and blood became my curse. It poisoned my life, prevented me from building relationships, and kept me from simply enjoying the simple pleasures of being human. Men, like moths to a flame, were drawn to what they called my angelic appearance. Blonde hair, large gray eyes, delicate features. But upon encountering my timidity, they quickly lost interest. They wanted a woman who was a celebration. I was a woman of twilight. My married life was a calm pond where, as the saying goes, devils swim. My husband, Ethan, was my complete opposite. Loud, self-assured, he seemed capable of finding common ground with anyone. We had been together for 10 years, and for all those years, I lived in his shadow, content with the role of the quiet, unremarkable wife. He was my world, my rock, my one and only man. I loved him blindly, recklessly, forgiving him everything, his harshness, his neglect, and at times his outright rudeness. Love, as they say, is blind. And then I found the box. It was in the farthest corner of our attic, buried under a pile of old junk. An ordinary cardboard box, tied with twine, but there was something sinister about it. Some gut feeling, a sixth sense, told me I shouldn't touch it. But curiosity, as it so often does, overcame fear. With trembling hands, I untied the knot. Inside were old photographs, letters, some documents. And the more I read, the more the blood in my veins ran cold. Unfamiliar faces stared back at me from the old yellowed pictures. Men, women, children, but one face I recognized immediately. My Ethan. Only he wasn't alone. In every photograph, he was embracing another woman. And in his eyes was a tenderness, a love that I had never seen in all our 10 years together. I flipped through the photos, and a life I never knew unfolded before me. Here they were at the beach, laughing, splashing water. Here they were on a picnic, surrounded by friends. And here was a wedding photograph. Ethan in a black suit, she in a white dress, and the inscription on the back, Ethan and Sarah, together forever. The world collapsed. Everything I had believed in, everything I had lived for, was a lie. My husband, my one and only beloved man, was living a double life. He had another family, another wife, other children, and I was just a shadow, a convenient cover, a quiet harbor to return to after stormy passions. I sat in the dusty attic among old, forgotten things, and tears streamed down my cheeks. But they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of rage. In that moment, something inside me broke. The modest, quiet Lily everyone knew was dead. And in her place, another woman was born. A woman who thirsted for revenge. I knew what I had to do. I had to meet her, this Sarah, look her in the eyes, find out how she could do this to me,
to another woman, and I was prepared to do anything to get what I wanted, even if it meant committing a crime. I came down from the attic, knowing with certainty that my old life was over. Ahead of me lay an unknown future, full of pain, hatred, and despair. But I was ready for it. After all, as they say, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, and I was not just scorned, I was crushed. And now I was out for blood. Revenge is a dish best served cold. This cliche, which I had once considered the height of vulgarity, now became my only creed. The rage that had boiled inside me in the attic subsided, replaced by an icy, calculated calm. The old Lily, the one who flinched at a loud word, was dead. Now a cold, ruthless observer resided within me, a strategist whose sole purpose was to strike a blow so powerful it would be impossible to recover from. I wasn't going to make a scene with screaming and broken dishes. Oh no, my plan was far more sophisticated. I wanted to rip their happiness away just as they had ripped my life away from me, slowly, painfully, forcing them to feel the loss with every fiber of their being.
From the letters in that cursed box, I learned her name, Sarah, and her address, a small, cozy town a 2-hour drive from ours. The very next Saturday, telling Ethan I was going to visit a sick aunt, I got on the train. My heart wasn't beating. It was ticking like a metronome, counting down the time until I would begin my new, terrible role. I found their house easily. A charming 2-story cottage with a manicured garden where roses bloomed. Smoke curled from the chimney, a child's bicycle stood on the porch, an idol, a false idol, built on my pain. I stood behind a tree on the opposite side of the street and waited like a spider for its prey. And then she came out. Sarah. She was beautiful. Not with a flashy, vulgar beauty, but with a kind of warm, homely grace. Her dark hair was gathered in a messy bun, not a speck of makeup on her face, but her eyes shone with happiness. 2 children ran out after her, a boy of about 7 and a slightly younger girl. They laughed, chasing each other on the lawn. And then he came out onto the porch. My Ethan. He scooped up the little girl, kissed the top of her head, then hugged Sarah and whispered something tenderly in her ear. She laughed. That laugh cut through my heart like a red-hot knife. He never laughed like that with me. He never looked at me with such all-consuming tenderness. In that moment, I understood that I wasn't even second best. I was a nobody, a blank space, a backup plan. I watched them for several hours, until dusk began to fall. I saw them having lunch on the veranda, saw Ethan playing ball with the children, saw them all weeding the rosebed together. Every smile, every gesture was torture for me. This was the life I had dreamed of, the family I had wanted to build with him. But he had given it to another. I returned home late that evening, drained, and yet filled with resolve. When Ethan asked how my trip was, I answered with the smile I had rehearsed the entire train ride home. "Everything's fine, darling. My aunt is feeling better." He hugged me, and a chill ran down my spine at his touch. I wasn't hugging my husband. I was hugging a monster, a traitor. And in his arms, I swore that I would destroy their little paradise. I would become the shadow at their window, a ghost who would burst into their lives and burn it to the ground. My modesty was dead. Now I was ready for anything. Simply observing from a distance could not quench my thirst for revenge. I needed to get closer, to breathe the air of their world, to become a part of it before poisoning it with my venom. My plan was audacious and monstrous in its simplicity. I decided to befriend Sarah. I, the quiet and unassuming Lily, had to play the role of a confident, outgoing woman who could easily make new friends. And, to my own surprise, I succeeded. The acting talent that had lain dormant within me for all these years awoke. Suffering became my greatest teacher. I found out that on Wednesdays, Sarah took her daughter to a local art studio. I also happened to be there, having enrolled a fictitious niece who was supposedly staying with me. Our first meeting was perfectly staged. I dropped a folder of drawings and she helped me pick them up. We started talking. I introduced myself as Helen, a widow who had recently moved to town. My backstory was flawless, and my eyes held such genuine sorrow for my own life, that Sarah immediately felt sympathy for me. She was exactly as I had imagined her, kind, compassionate, a little naive, the perfect victim. We started meeting every Wednesday. We would drink coffee in a small cafe while her children were busy with their art. She spoke rapturously about her family, her children, her husband, about Ethan. With every word she spoke, my heart turned into a shard of ice. She described him as the most caring husband and father in the world. He works so much, always away on business trips, she would complain with a smile, but when he's home, it's a real celebration. The kids just adore him. I listened, nodded, smiled sympathetically, while inside everything in me was screaming with hatred. I learned about his habits, his favorite foods, the funny stories from their life. He was living between two families, and in each one, he managed to be perfect. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a talent, a diabolical, sophisticated talent for lying. One day, as we were sitting in the cafe, she suddenly became serious and, lowering her voice, said, "You know, Helen, in a way, I'm a second wife too. Ethan had a woman before me. They were together for a very short time. She died in a car crash. Poor thing. He took it very hard. He still doesn't like to talk about it. Sometimes I think I see a shadow of that other woman in his eyes, as if he's comparing me to her." At that moment, I nearly dropped my cup. The air froze in my lungs. He hadn't just started a second family. He had buried me. To this woman, to her world, I was dead. I didn't exist. I was just a ghost, a shadow from a past that was not to be spoken of. The shock was so intense that for a moment I lost my composure. Sarah looked at me with concern. "Helen, are you okay? You're so pale." I forced a smile. No, I'm fine. I just was thinking about my late husband." And in that instant, I knew that a simple expose wouldn't be enough. I wouldn't just tell her the truth. I would rise from the dead, and my ghost would haunt them for the rest of their days. The information about my death was the final straw. The plan for revenge, which had been vague and hazy, came into crystalline focus. I would arrange a face-to-face meeting for him with a ghost. I would force him to look into the eyes of the woman he had so carelessly buried. And his second, unsuspecting wife would be the main spectator in this theater of horror. I chose our 10th wedding anniversary as the date for the performance. The irony was exquisite. He, of course, had forgotten the date. For the past few years, he hadn't bothered himself with such trifles. The preparations took a week. That week, I was the epitome of the perfect wife. I cooked his favorite meals, greeted him from work with a smile, and was gentle and submissive.
He relaxed, let his guard down, assuming that his quiet, modest Lily had finally resigned herself to her gray life. Meanwhile, I was setting the stage for the finale of our drama. The main set was to be our living room. I got our wedding album down from the top of the closet, which we hadn't opened in years. On the coffee table, I placed our largest framed wedding photograph. Around it, I arranged other pictures. Here we were on our honeymoon, here at our housewarming, here celebrating our first anniversary. I was creating an altar to our love, to our marriage, an altar upon which I was going to sacrifice his lie.
The day before the anniversary, I called Sarah. My voice trembled, this time completely genuinely. Choking on sobs, I told her a fabricated story that my husband, the deceased one, had turned out to be a scoundrel, that he was alive, and that I had accidentally found him. And the worst part was, he was about to marry someone else. I begged her, as my only friend, to come and support me on this terrible day when I was going to expose him. I knew she wouldn't refuse. Her kind heart wouldn't let her leave a friend in distress. I gave her our address and set the time, 7 in the evening, the exact time Ethan usually came home from work. On the appointed day, I put on the same dress I wore on our first date. I did my hair, my makeup. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. I saw a beautiful, confident woman with a feverish glint in her eyes, a woman on her way to an execution. I was calm. It was the calm of a surgeon before a complex operation. I knew that tonight I would cut the cancerous tumor named Ethan out of my life. And if I had to cut out my own heart along with it, I didn't care. There was almost nothing left of it anyway. At 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Sarah stood on the doorstep, a worried look on her face. "Helen, I'm here. We'll get through this," she said, hugging me. I led her into the living room. She froze when she saw the table set for 2 and the wedding photos. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's a surprise," I replied in an icy voice. "For my husband." At that moment, a key turned in the lock. Ethan appeared in the doorway. Time stood still. Ethan froze on the threshold, his eyes starting from me to Sarah, then to the wedding photographs on the table. A whole spectrum of emotions washed over his face: bewilderment, confusion, and then primal, animal terror. He looked at the two of us standing in the same room and seemed to stop breathing. The air in the living room grew thick, viscous. You could cut it with a knife. Sarah, pale as a sheet, shifted her gaze from the photos of a smiling Ethan embracing me to the living, petrified Ethan standing before her. "Ethan, what does all this mean? Who is this woman?" "I'm his wife," I answered for him, my voice ringing out loud and clear in the deafening silence. Lily, his living, not dead, wife. I had expected anything: screaming, tears, accusations. But Ethan's reaction was completely different. He slowly sank into an armchair, covered his face with his hands, and let out a low, ragged groan. It was a sound filled with such pain, such despair, that even my icy heart faltered for a moment. Sarah looked at him, and there was no longer shock in her eyes, only boundless, all-consuming pity. "Lily," Ethan finally said, without lifting his head, "you don't understand. It's not like that. The man in these pictures, that's not me." I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Not you? Ethan, don't play the fool. Do you think I wouldn't recognize my own husband of 10 years? "It's my brother," he said, and silence once again fell upon the room. "My twin brother, Michael." He looked up at me,
And for the first time, I saw not deceit in his eyes, but only an endless, draining exhaustion. And he began to talk about how he had a twin brother he never spoke of because their paths had diverged long ago. Michael was his complete opposite, an adventurer, a gambler, a man who lived for the day. He married Sarah, adored her and the children, but was constantly getting into trouble. A year ago, he got into his last scrape. Huge debts, threats, and he just disappeared. Ran away, leaving his family with no money and no protection. But before he left, he went to Ethan and begged him for one thing. Don't tell Sarah the truth. Tell her he died and help his family. I couldn't refuse them, Lily, he whispered. Sarah loved him so much, the truth would have killed her. And the kids, I went to see them on weekends, brought them money, played the role of Uncle Ethan, helping his late brother's family. The business trips were my cover. I lied to you because I was afraid you wouldn't understand, that you would judge me, afraid that your shyness, your modesty, wouldn't be able to handle a truth like that. I chose to lie to protect you both. The box in the attic was Michael's archive, which Ethan had collected from his apartment. He kept it, unable to bring himself to throw away another person's life.
I stood in the middle of the room I had turned into a courtroom and realized that I had just made the most terrible mistake of my life. My revenge, so meticulously planned, so righteous in my own eyes, had come crashing down on an innocent man. A man who had lived for 10 years in a lie that was tearing him apart, trying to save the people he loved. He had lied, yes, but his lie was not born of betrayal, but of a strange, twisted form of love and duty. And I, in my blind rage, in my hurt, I hadn't even tried to talk to him. My perpetual modesty, my self-doubt, my fear of direct confrontation had played a monstrous joke on me. I had chosen to be an investigator, a judge, and an executioner, instead of simply asking. My heart, which I thought had turned to stone, suddenly clenched in pain. The shock wasn't that my husband was a bigamist. The shock was that he never was. And the real monster in this story was me. I looked at Ethan, at Sarah, who was crying softly, no longer from deception, but from grief for her real, missing husband. And I knew that tonight I had destroyed not one, but 3 lives. Mine, most of all. My confession is over, but I do not seek forgiveness, for there is no forgiveness for one who has passed a death sentence upon herself. Stories are born from emotions. If this story made you feel something, please share your thoughts. Every comment is a spark of inspiration for new stories about struggle, strength, and the hope that never fades, even in the harshest of realities.